Hey guys, my name is Alucard, and today we're going to take a look at the basics of how to draft and a few tips on how to succeed at drafting. So what is draft? Imagine a table. Now imagine 8 different players sitting around this table. Each of those 8 players has 3 booster packs containing 15 cards each. To start, every player opens 1 booster pack. Out of the 15 cards in your booster pack, you choose a card that you want to keep and pass the remaining 14 cards to the left. Likewise, the player to your right will pass you 14 cards. Once all players have 14 cards, then a new card selection is made and 13 cards are passed to the left. This continues until all packs are exhausted of cards. At this point, each player has 15 selected cards total. Then a second booster pack is opened by all players and the same process follows. However, the cards are now passed to the right instead of the left. Finally, the third booster pack is opened and cards are passed again to the left. Once players have their entire pool of 45 cards, they begin building 40 card minimum decks out of their drafted cards, plus 20 each of all 5 standard resources. Then players will play a 3-round tournament against each other for prizes and glory. In order to participate in a draft tournament, players need to have 3 booster packs of the appropriate format and a 100 platinum entry fee. The current format as of October 11th, 2015 requires 3 Armies of Myth booster packs. In the tournaments menu, you can find 2 different types of draft tournaments. There's the competitive draft queue and the draft queue. The competitive draft queue is single elimination, which means if you lose a match, then you are knocked out of the tournament. However, players who perform well in the competitive draft queue have a better chance of earning larger payouts. The normal draft queue is a Swiss-style tournament, so you do not get knocked out if you lose a match. You get to play 3 rounds of the tournament regardless of the outcome of your matches. The prize structure of the queues are as follows. The competitive draft queue awards players who are knocked out in round 1 no prizes at all. Players knocked out in round 2 receive 2 booster packs. The second place finisher gets 3 booster packs, and the winner of the tournament receives 5 booster packs. In the normal draft queue, the total number of packs distributed is the same as the competitive queue. However, each player receives 1 booster pack per match win. Regardless of the queue, all players will receive all of their drafted cards once the tournament is complete. Once you have joined a draft queue, you will see all the players that are currently in the queue. If you decide to drop from the queue, you will be reimbursed the booster packs and 100 platinum entry fee. However, once the queue fills to 8 players, the queue is full and the draft begins. In the drafting interface, you will see all the cards in the first booster pack you open. There are always 11 common and 3 uncommon cards in a booster pack. The 15th card is either a rare or legendary card. Most of the time, you'll open a rare card. However, there's about a 1 in 9 chance per pack of opening a legendary card instead. Legendary cards are often extremely powerful and quite valuable. You can right-click cards to see a zoomed-in version of the card so that you can read them more clearly. Simply left-click outside of the card window to get back to the draft window. Once you feel satisfied with a card selection, just click and drag a card to the bottom of the screen, which shows your drafted cards. You can also double-click to draft a card. Selected cards will be permanently added to your collection after the tournament, so choose wisely. Once all players have made their selection, the next pack will appear at the top of the screen for you to choose from. It should now have 14 cards. This will continue, as I mentioned before, with packs being passed around the virtual table until 45 cards are drafted. Keep in mind that each pick is on a time limit, and the game will select a random card from the pack when the time limit expires. This countdown timer is shown in the middle of the screen. While drafting, you can sort cards by shard, cost, type, rarity, and name. Sorting by cost and type are particularly helpful to see how expensive your cards are, and if you are acquiring enough troops and actions to have a well-balanced deck. I'll cover some tips on how to achieve a well-balanced deck later in this video. There are also options to view cards in the drafting window, as well as your own personal drafted cards window in different ways. Try different options and see what's comfortable for you. I personally like using the large and small card pictures for the drafting window and the stacked view for my own personal drafted cards window. In the lower right corner of your drafted cards window, there's a little box icon. This is called the bin, and it can be a very helpful tool. Sometimes you'll draft cards that you aren't really interested in playing in your deck. This might be because you wanted a rare or legendary for your collection. It could be that there wasn't anything good for you to pick, so you decided to deny other players the option of taking that card. Or maybe you were passed a few cards, all of which you didn't really want to pick up, but you don't really have any good options there. So you end up grabbing some card that you don't really have any interest in playing in your deck. Well, you can place cards in the bin by clicking and dragging cards over to it in order to remove them from your drafted cards list. Don't worry, you'll still get to keep those cards at the end of the tournament for your collection. However, you won't have to look at them while you're drafting, so you can focus more intently on looking at the cards that you're building your drafted deck with. You can always look at your bin by clicking on the bin tab. While you're in the bin tab, you can move cards back to your drafted cards list by clicking and dragging them over to the drafted cards icon in the lower right corner. If you want to go back to your drafted cards, just click on the drafted cards tab. After completing the drafting phase, players have 15 minutes to build their decks. In draft, players must build a 40-card minimum deck out of the cards that they drafted, plus 20 of each of the standard resources. You can drag cards back and forth between the top area, which is your reserves, and the bottom area, which is your deck, in order to build your deck. You can also double-click cards to move cards quickly from your reserves to your deck, or vice versa. You can also filter out certain shards or sort your cards to help you with the entire process. Once you have assembled your deck, you must also choose a champion. You can do so by clicking the button in the lower right corner of the screen. This will bring up a list of champions to pick from. Select a champion and then save your deck. Once all players have saved their deck, the tournament will begin. Each match is a best of 3 games. In the case of the competitive draft queue, whoever wins 2 out of the 3 games will move on to the next round. In the normal draft queue, winning a match will secure a booster pack as a prize. In between games of a match, you have 2 minutes to change cards freely between your deck and your reserves. Most players refer to this as sideboarding, and it can be extremely important. Sideboarding allows you to add cards that may be particularly strong against certain matchups to your deck before heading into the second or third game of your match. Once you start the next match, your deck will automatically reset itself to the deck that you originally built. Now let's talk about some drafting tips. Tip number 1. When first starting out drafting, stick with 1 or 2 shards. If you're drawn towards too many different shards and end up having to play 3 or more different shards, then your deck may have problems with consistency in being able to play everything. Tip number 2. While drafting cards, a good rule of thumb is to follow the BREAD acronym when prioritizing the order of the selection of cards. B stands for bombs, which are really strong cards that usually can win the game on their own. Examples of some of these bombs are shown here. They can range anywhere from legendaries to rares and even uncommons. R stands for removal, which are any cards that can eliminate threats on the opponent's side of the board. Here are some examples of removal. The term hard removal is used if a card can destroy or deal enough damage to kill a troop. The term soft removal applies when you can eliminate a threat temporarily or circumstantially. E stands for evasion, which are any cards, generally troops, that can evade being blocked by your opponent so that you can push damage through to them. Anything with the flight keyword or can't be blocked by are great for helping to knock your opponent's life total to 0 pretty quickly. A stands for aggression or aggro. This could include aggressive combat tricks, or cards with utility like Stirring Oration, Invigorating Breeze, or even just solid troops like Smashadon, Deadeye Slicer, and Lithe Lyricist. Finally, D stands for dregs or duds. These are cards that you generally don't want to be playing in your deck, but if your deck is missing a few playables, you may be forced to play these just based on what you had selected in the draft. Tip number 3. If you're on a tight budget, or simply just want to be thrifty, don't be afraid to take rares and legendaries when you see them, even if they won't fit into the deck you're building. Remember that any card you take during the draft immediately belongs to you after the draft concludes. Rares and legendaries have value when sold on the auction house, and that can help provide you with a supply of platinum that will allow you to draft again and again. Sometimes a rare draft or two really doesn't hurt. Tip number 4. Generally, a good rule of thumb for deck building is to have 40% of your deck as resources and 60% as non-resources. So for a 40-card deck, 40% would be 16 resources. I personally feel like that is a low number for most decks, so I highly recommend that in most cases, you should play 17 resources in your draft decks. Tip number 5. Try to build a deck as close to 40 cards as possible. This will help you have the greatest chance of drawing the best cards in your deck. Tip number 6. While deck building, include at least 15 troops in your deck. If you have a lot of removal, you can compensate for this, but having a good troop count is almost always a critical piece of winning draft tournaments. Tip number 7. Follow the triple S rule when you're about to complete the deck building process. Sockets, sleeves, and save. Make sure to add gems to all of your socketable cards to buff them up. Sleeve up your deck to make it look cool, and make sure to save your deck before time runs out. So that's it for me today. In the coming weeks and months, I plan to make more in-depth tutorials about advanced strategies and tactics when drafting in HEX. So please subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with your friends, and leave any comments or questions below. Thanks for watching.